Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss, the host of the program here at allpointstv.com. The program comes on at 2 o'clock, and the program is called What's Going On. We are the program that precedes Satori's Black History Corner every 2 weeks. And next week, they'll be with us again for another edition of their program that comes on at 3:30, and they hang around about 4 o'clock. We are now reducing our program. I guess we're jealous of the fact they have more person watching their program than we have watching ours. And we decided the problem is we're too long-winded. So we're going to cut our program down to 30 minutes. We know how busy you are, and we want to try to stay within the parameters of your schedule. And we know that you're busy and you're doing so many other things with your time. So we want to try to spend about 30 minutes with you. And that's what we'll be doing from this point forward. It used to be an hour program from 2 o'clock to 3. But we're going to cut it down from 2 o'clock to 2:30. And John has told me he's going to give me the signal. And when he starts sawing at his neck, that means I got to get out of here. And we will do that at the appropriate time. We want you to stay around for a few minutes. And I want you to stay around to all the programs here at allpointstv.com, because all the programs here are what we think are quality programs. And we spend a lot of time in terms of coming to the studio ahead of time and trying to put together how we're going to present the topics for the day. And then after that is in fact done and we come before the cameras, we've been given the charge to come here and try to make it worth your time. I hope it'll be worth your time today. We are in uncharted waters. Never before have we had a presidential candidate who is possibly under, and the probabilities are growing every day with new revelations about the email situation. The probabilities are growing every day that we are probably facing something that was not intended by the Constitution of the United States. If you read the document, you'll see that the intentions were to have a way of getting rid of the rotten apples, government that becomes out of the parameters of the Constitution of the United States. What do you do in those particulars? And the solution was in Article 2, Section 4, where you have the ability to remove a sitting federal office holder. And in Article 2, Section 4, it says the president, so it goes up to the very highest levels of government, the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be, the word is shall, not can be, shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors, even smaller crimes, but certainly high crimes, shall be removed from office upon impeachment for, that's in the House, in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, after which then is referred to the Senate under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 for the trial. And if both those two processes are carried out, then that person who has been impeached means to officially be accused of wrongdoing while in office, and then convicted upon the impeachment charge, which is tried in the Senate, then that person shall be, not can be, shall be removed from office. And that's what the framers were thinking about when they in fact put the strictures on the government of what its requirements were for exercising power in this country. It never dawned upon the framers, because a lot of what you write is subjective to your own situation, and they were not at that point as politicians installed in office right now. So they were trying to figure a way of once the installation had occurred, and it won't occur until the following year after the ratification had taken place. I mean, George Washington became president in 1789, having been elected in the same year as the ratification of the Constitution, but his inauguration is the following year, March the 4th of 1789. And so therefore, they're putting in place what you have to do to get rid of a person that gets into office and then begins to violate the canons under which he was in fact installed in his office, or inaugurated by taking the 35 words in the Constitution of the United States if you're the President of the United States. So you start off with the idea of how to get rid of bad apples, because the idea was that you throw bad people out. No one thought about a situation where you throw the bad guys in, which is where we are right now in this uncharted waters. We've never seen anything like this before. This has never happened in the 200 plus years of the Republic. And I don't care if you dated back in 1776, in the throwing out of the King of England, King George III, and they had to remind him of the fact he'd been thrown out by engaging in a 7-year conflict that was a state to him that he was in fact leaving, whether he wanted to leave or not on his own volition, that if he didn't leave, he'd be forced to leave. And that's what the fighting was about once the Declaration had occurred. So if you dated at that point, with the Declaration of Independence, July the 4th, 1776, although it should have had on the July the 2nd, but because of some peripheral problems that developed, it was only 2 days later when it was in fact initiated and put into the public domain. But let's take the date July the 4th, and we'll say then at that point, if you want to start at that date, in the spirit of 76, that's the genesis of the nation's installation as a separate entity apart from that of Great Britain, then we can start at that date. If you want to start with the ratification of the Constitution in terms of what had been drawn up in Philadelphia, and then submitted to the 13 states, 2/3 of which had to ratify the document, meaning 9 states had to say yes to it. 4 could say otherwise, but the 9 would carry it, 2/3 required. Then if you dated at that point, then we're talking about 1788. But never in the 2 instances, whatever your date would be that prevails in how you see the beginning of the nation's history as a separate and independent entity, never have we had this crisis come upon these shores. And no one could have imagined that it would come upon these shores, given where they were at that time, and even where we were up until the present time, because this was something that I don't think anybody could have foreseen, the time that you would have persons that may well be installed in office. I don't think it's going to happen, because I don't think we're there yet. I mean, are we there yet? I don't think we're there yet. We might be there. But I guess I'm on that point. I guess I'm from Missouri. You got to show me that we are there, because I don't believe we're there. But it does not mean that I can't be convinced of it. And what will convince me of it is the aftermath of the election on November the 8th. And we got 80% of the vote to go at this point, because 20% of the people have cast their ballots in the preliminary, and that's quite interesting also. But I have to say this. I think that to the innocence of the framers, because they envisioned the country to operate from a beginning point of innocence, of political innocence, that you're not going in with less than benevolent intentions, no matter what the intentions are once you arrive with power and the willing of power. I think that their view was you go in with the best of intentions. Now you might get power and decide that you want to do something different.
But the founders they read Montesquieu, they read all the other, the spirit of the law and all that, but they also were aware of history. They had understanding of European history, and they had to realize that politics attracts a certain type of people.
Yes, they did.
And if they wanted to be honest, they were of those type of people. To a large degree, they had those same tendencies.
Thank you.
But one thing they had about it, they had an honesty and integrity to admit that they had those tendencies.
Yeah.
But let's face it, as soon as the concept of the country started rolling, they started trying to they started expanding their powers as soon as they got the chance to do it. A lot of them did. Jefferson did. I mean, to some degree, he did stuff that he philosophically said he would be opposing. So this corruption, this ability to change the course, started almost immediately.
Yeah, John. That's why I brought a question I'm going to ask you later on. I brought a question I'm going to ask you. I got two questions. One, the hard question, if you can answer that one, I think you can. But if you can't, I got the easier question. I got one that's hard and one. This is going to be Jeopardy today on the program. But what you just said is so prescient that I think most of the scholars, and I've been around a lot of them, I think most of the scholars in the history field have missed that point that you just made. The idea of their understanding of human nature and understanding that it had to be nailed down because the kind of people that pursue power, very few of the person that pursue power have virtue. And no people, whether they pursue power or not, are angels. And so therefore, to give any person less than an angel power is to invite the abuse of that power. And they were very much aware of that, having studied, as John just said a minute ago, had studied history, and were very much aware of the question. They carried a question, by the way, to their historical understanding. And that question was the one that's raised by C.F. Bonnet, the French writer, in his book called The Ruins of Empire. And those of you who read the book, they came out in the 18th century, somewhere in the if my memory serves me correctly, somewhere in the 1790s. Bonnet had gone he calls the book The Ruins of Empire, and what Count C.F. Bonnet, Constantine Francis Bonnet, tried to understand, he went to the ruins of these once great empires, and he tried to have the empire speak to him about why those once great empires had come to the ruins he was looking at as he saw the different empires having been smashed. He wanted to know what caused that. And that's the question the framers carried to these past civilizations. And the question they were asking is, why did all these civilizations prior to this country standing up, why did they meet their end? And they came up with a solution to their question, an answer to that question, and they decided to put things in place so that which they saw has been brought the other societies to a close from within. How do you prevent that? Because they saw the end result having been the way in which the politicals wielded power. And the question was how to then not surrender to the problem, but how to engage it so that that which has happened in the past doesn't happen in the present. And that was the charge that they were in that room behind closed doors trying to figure out. And you remember that one lady that came up to Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, and she wanted to know why all this secrecy. And wanted to know, what is it that you're doing in that room? And Benjamin Franklin's answer was that they were trying to create a republic. And the question was, how did you do that? Because republics had been created before. People had the idea of creating republics. I mean, look at these number of societies that were called republics. The idea was to set up a republican government, government where the people would be in charge. But when you put people in charge of the people, then that's not the people anymore, that's a government in charge. So how do you maintain that? And that's what they're behind closed doors trying to figure out. That's what took them so long. They were there for 3 months trying to get it right. And they had their, how you have that song that says, if I had a hammer, they would hammer in the morning, and then they would hammer in the evening, and all through the summertime, they were trying to hammer their findings down. They saw the problem. The problem is, on the one hand, the need for government. On the other hand, the need to stop government from being that which they said government, to stop the other from being when there was no government, and that was the bully. How do you stop you get the first one, stop the bully. That's obviously why you need government. Someone has to stand up to the bully. But the government stands up in the bully's place, and what keeps the government from being that person or that entity? And that was what they were hammering out. They tried to do it. See, this is not something that you get done in one fell swoop. You have to work on this in terms of incremental steps toward it, because the first, if you go back and look at the Articles of Confederation, their first attempt to do that, to rectify what they had uncovered, was to not give the federal government any power. And one way you would not have the government go out of control is just simply don't let it do anything. All its job is to stop the bully. And if it can just do that and don't give them any additional power to do anything else, that controls it. But the bully stood up in 1786 under the auspices of the Daniel Shays army. You say rebellion if you want to. The man had an army. And there was nothing that could match that bully that was in the federal arsenal to be able to put that fire out that he had started by rebelling against the established order. And they realized that they had so weakened the federal government, they had to have another answer, because that was a good attempt at it. But it wasn't enough to stop this, because in Massachusetts, Daniel Shays stood up and was rebelling, and Massachusetts couldn't put it down. And there was nothing on the federal level that could come to the assistance of Massachusetts that would help put it down, because there was nothing in the federal structure that allowed us to be put into the place to put that fire out. And they saw then under that umbrella, all of them were in fact in harm's way. All of them were in jeopardy. I was going to ask, I came to the studio, I got to ask John a question here, because John is so smart. You know, that I come here and take John's notes. I come to the studio every Monday, and I spend 15 minutes taking notes, and then we design the program. Let me see if John has the answer to this question here. I brought this book in here by Judge Andrew P. Napolitano. You know him because he's on television all the time on Fox, the People's Station, used to be at least. Because they're flexing, you know, they're number one now, so they're flexing their muscles. So I don't know where they're going from this point. I'm going to see, though, because I'm going to see what they do with Megyn Kelly if they renew her contract. She's asked for $20 million. John, who do you think said this right here? I'm going to give you a statement here. This is the name of Napolitano's book. But I got two questions. Can't answer the hard one. I got an easy one, because it's really tied to the same question. Napolitano's book is called "It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong." Who do you think said that?
That was Reagan?
Not Reagan. There's a philosopher.
Oh, a philosopher. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like something he would say, though. I'm stumped there.
He did say the problem is government. He did say that. But this one is, it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. The person that said that, and the one that gave Napolitano the title for his book, by that title, "It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong," that was Voltaire. But who is the one that said, "Give me liberty or give me death"?
That was Patrick Henry, wasn't it?
Patrick Henry. And they're talking out of the same side of their mouths in terms of that, because the government, if the government is wrong and you're right, the government is very much willing to give you death. And that's what I wrote about in my post today, in terms of how you're going to rectify this problem that just stood up on his ear with what we're facing right now in the political process, with this election coming up in exactly 8 more days. This is the last day of the month. Hope you got the candy ready for the kids coming out there begging.
But, my dad always said about the right, he was talking mostly about, stopping it. There's, stop signs and stuff like that. You don't stop, you stop because you see traffic coming. People say, you have the right of way. He goes, yeah, but there's right and there's dead right. Well, there's also, you could be dead right as being you're definitely, if you're staying up to the government, right. You're going to be right, but you're going to be dead right.
You're going to be dead. You'll be right, but you'll also be buried with your righteousness. You got to understand that that right, everything has a season. And although right is always in vogue, is always in season, but there is a time and place even for that which is right and righteous, and you have to know when to, in fact, push the envelope in that direction and when to push back, pull back, and wait for the right moment so right can do its work. Sometimes we get to a point, I mean, there was a book out I read back in the latter part of the 1960s, written by Huey Newton, called Revolutionary Suicide. And the idea that he had was that he's going to be right. In order to prove he was right, he's willing to stand up there and take some bullets in his head. Suicide is not revolutionary. Living is revolutionary. And you can be right, but when the government is wrong, understand that you're in imminent danger. Because, and I called for this in my article today, I said the real solution to the problem in Washington right now, what they're doing in terms of running this campaign with a person that may well be, and I don't think she will be, because I don't think we're there yet, but a woman that could be, from what I'm saying, could be thrown into office. And that was never intended by the framers. We never intended to have someone whose corruption is on the front street, right in our faces, and then we throw the corrupt person in power. The idea was, in Article 2, Section 4, to take those persons who once they rear their heads up and become corrupt. There was an intercessory component of the Constitution that allows you to intervene and deal with the person that rears their head up in violation of the strictures under which they went into office. That's why you inaugurate them. So they take an oath, so that once the inviolable becomes violated, then there's a way in which you remedy the situation and reverse it in terms of the process of inclusion becomes a process reverse in the Constitution. You see, put your hands on some document and say you swear to uphold it, but if you don't uphold it, then the process has within it the way in which you undo that which breaks the oath, and you reverse it by taking the person and getting them out because the oath was violated.
Well, you know what the most galling part, especially with Hillary and all these other ones recently, and some of the Republicans, is that the Constitution they're sworn to protect and uphold, and then when there's you point out that they're violating it, they turn around and tell you it's not there, even though it's in clear black and white or whatever color you choose to print on or whatever the document's the page color is. It's there, and yet they're saying, no, you misunderstood it.
Right.
Even though it's pretty clear in most of his instances,
that, and also the idea that we have a living Constitution. Now, you got words on paper, right? Can we all admit the person that wrote it are dead now? So how is it, you explain this to me, please. Or some of you politicians can explain it. Some of you professors at these universities. Jonathan Gruber, don't you try to explain it. Gruber is the one that gave us the Obamacare. You remember his words, right? So we don't need Gruber to come into a discussion about anything. Let's have this other Jonathan from is it from American University? One of those universities, named Jonathan Turley. Let's have the scholar, the constitutional scholar, explain this to us in terms of how you can have a person writing a document that's ratified in 1788 with the 7 articles in it. Not to talk about the amendments that we added to it later on. Let's talk about the foundational document, of which the rest of it is just the arteries added to it later on through the amendment process. How can the document that they wrote be living when the people that wrote it are dead? Can you explain that to me? That they wrote a living document, but yet the people that wrote it have all died. The only way the document can be living is that it's in fact kept alive in the place in which it was written by the framers. To rewrite it is not to have a living document, but to have a document that's been altered. So don't come telling me, because I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. Don't come telling me the document they wrote is a living document. The people that are living have to maintain the document. That's the problem, that we're not doing that, because we don't believe in the framers any longer in this country. We've cast them aside, And this was written in that time period. It is not modern. So now we're over here doing the modern stuff. And let me ask you a question about the modern stuff. How is that working out for the country? The modern stuff is what has gotten us in trouble. It got us in trouble in 1913. We didn't understand that the modern stuff, like the other way they were controlling the government, which was in fact not letting them get into the purse of the American people. No federal income tax. You can only do so much. You can only do so much as your money would allow you to do. We didn't understand that was another way in which they had the check and balance system in place on a hierarchical level by putting a barrier between the people and the federal government, and that barrier was the states. The states could tax directly, but a direct tax on the people by the federal government is forbidden in the Constitution. And if anybody doubts that, go read Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Prohibited. It took an amendment to change that. And when they did that, the spider web they had created, you see in the spider's web, when you shake any part of the spider's web, the entire web shakes. And I would declare, here I'm declaring in a room, in a studio, in front of a camera, that anything that shakes the fabric of the federal system is very institutionalization, is very presence unconstitutional, because you cannot pass a constitutional amendment that abrogates the federal system. I know you're going to tell me that it's been ratified and placed in the Constitution. I'm not so sure that even occurred. I studied how that was ratified. I'm not so sure you had those states that did that. And I read some of the documents going back to read whether or not that ratification would have occurred. Because you can claim that something occurred, and how would they know? Because you're the ones counting the votes. And don't forget that particular thing in terms of who's counting the votes in this election coming up. Because liars can figure, but figures do not lie. And so the framers had the best idea: limited government. And limited in all the ways that you can think of in that room, to limit it so that it does not slide from underneath the restraints and become the behemoth that we see right now. Starting out as the smallest government and intended to be that, and now it is the largest government on the planet. And that can only happen because government is the problem. And the question we got to figure out, this is our charge for the day, given the fact that they figured out most of it for us. We don't have to do a whole lot of work right now, as a matter of fact, because the framers did most of the work. They were able to figure this thing out. And they put in place a system where 95% of it was figured out for posterity. That's why they said, do ordain and establish this Constitution for ourselves and our posterity. It figured it out. They realized that this was not put in place and figured out just for the time being. They expanded the solution down through posterity. And it was figured out for us as well. All we got to do is hold on to it. And now we come to this point where something is going out of kilter that was not seen in the fortuitous standards, the fortuitous means in which they established this Constitution. And they were very cognizant of the need to do the work that they did. They did it methodically. Article 1, let's put all that in place. Article 2, let's put all of that in place. Article 3, put all of that in place, and the rest of it will follow from that. If you look at it, you set the government up first with under certain parameters. Then you add to it how to then deal with it within the confines of what you created. They were brilliant in that. And there's nobody that's come after them that's done anything better than what they did in that convention in 1787 and ratified it in 1788. It didn't take a long time to ratify it. They knew what they had. They had been through the Shays Rebellion, and they knew what they had to put in place to stop that, because they had shown there was some irregularity that the articles did not speak to. So they wanted to remedy that in the thing that they put in the place of the articles. Now we have something that's in place now that they didn't see, and it's our job to do it. How do you do it? You do it through the voting process. And we got a challenge right now on November the 8th. We'll see how we handle it. Okay, we got to get out of here again, and we're only doing 30 minutes now. I want you to stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com. We have excellent programs here at the studio, all of them. I know that for a fact. I talk to the ones who come before the cameras. Once you watch the programs, and between now and next week, we're coming before you again at 2 o'clock sharp and hanging around 2:30. We want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.